Please give a very warm welcome to Miss Mira Sorvino. Lovely to have you here. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, my pleasure.
How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
Yeah, what a nice room.
One of my favorite of your very recent movies is non-horror, but I love it. It has some ties to the general neck of the woods. Is East of the Mountains.
Oh, good.
With Tom Skerritt.
Yes.
Just a terrific little quiet drama, and your work in it, as always, is really solid. There's a wonderful core of humanity there, and it's a great movie. It's a great little indie. It's streaming right now. A local director named Este Chiro directed it. So, quick plug for a non-horror movie that is absolutely awesome. I kind of want to start from the beginning because I'm also a big fan of your father's work. I'm a huge fan of your father's work. He was a great actor, and you had both your parents seem like really fascinating figures. You had your father, who was a veteran of like 200 pictures, and your mother, who was an activist, and she worked drama for
drama therapy for Alzheimer's
drama therapy
patients.
for yeah. What was it like living in that household?
Well, it was a little. It was unusual because Dad was gone like half the time for his work, and they made that decision when I was 8 that Mom would stay home with us kids and he would go off and, go make movies for 6 months out of the year, which I think ultimately maybe drove them apart, which was very sad. But we had this life that was half normal and half not because, Dad was a larger-than-life character, very loving father, very didactic teacher about the arts or tennis or cooking. With acting, he could teach it, but he was very, very specific and would not let a mediocre moment lie. Most other things he didn't have the patience for, like tennis. Like he loved tennis. He was a very good tennis player, even though he was a big man. But he had the best, shots. He just couldn't run much. But or teaching us Italian, he just couldn't. He tried for 3 weeks and then he would lose patience. But with acting, he had endless patience. So he used to come to all of my games. I go to my kids' games. He would come to my plays, and afterwards, all the other kids' parents would be like, "Honey, that was amazing. Come here." And he'd be like, "Very good, Mira. I just have 2 notes." And then he would sit me down backstage in the high school backstage where we put on our makeup beforehand and talk to me for 2 hours. And he would break down the play from the beginning to the end and where I had kind of not done it right or had not been focused on the other fellow he said, "Never sigh and then deliver your line." So he said, never go, and then say your line, because in that moment you are killing your instinct. You are making an intellectual choice. Never a thinking actor is a stinking actor. And he's like, stick with the other fellow. You may be boring, but you'll never be false. He just had so many different wonderful, wonderful notes, and they were true. And so I think, he started teaching me to act when I was 8. Meanwhile, my mom was throwing drama game parties for me and my friends. She'd bring out a giant grab bag and everybody pick out three props, and then we'd have to make up a skit involving the props. Or she'd bring out rainy day designs, these found objects and driftwood and things, and then we'd just, craft, little sculptures and stuff like that. So it was very artistic. Dad was singing all the time. He was singing opera all the time. He wanted to be an opera singer more than an actor, and at times he actually was able to realize that dream. Specifically, at 65 years old, he got to be the lead at the New York City Opera of The Most Happy Fellow, which is an operetta, but it's operatic music. And it was amazing, and we were so proud of him because it was showing us that at any age you can realize your dream. Like at a time when most people are retiring, he was finally realizing his big career goal to be an opera singer on the stage at Lincoln Center. That was his big dream. It was a little bit, living in New Jersey and being the daughter of a celebrity, sometimes kids kind of mocked, "Oh, you think you're so great because your dad's an actor." And it was a very snobby kind of area, very country clubby, very cliquey, but beautiful. Lots of trees, lots of places to ride your bike, my brother Mike is here. I used to ride him on the back of my parents' like 10-speed bike, and we'd go to the duck pond and at the golf course. So we had like a normal childhood and then a not normal childhood. It was people would come to our house that were very, very famous for dinner sometimes, or they'd take me along when I was a teenager, like Jason Miller, the Father Karras in The Exorcist, who was one of my dad's best friends and the author of the playwright of that championship season, which is how my dad was discovered on Broadway, playing Phil on the Broadway version. He got nominated for a Tony, and then they did the movie 10 years later, and Jason directed the movie, and then Dad directed the Showtime version of it and played the coach in the next iteration of it. And so Jason and his wife took me to New York alongside as they kind of went through the night in New York, and they were drinking, and I think she was snorting cocaine, and I'm like, what's happening? And just but like sometimes it was a very normal life, and sometimes it wasn't. And Jason was such a poet; he was such a wordsmith, and the poor man died early of his substance abuse issues, really. But it was a fascinating life, and they both loved us very much. They had some marital issues, and they ended up breaking up when I was 21, which was like a big tragedy for all of us. But they continued being great parents, all the way through our lives, and so it was an interesting. Mom was the sort of moral compass of the family, and Dad was the artistic, like it has to be pure, it has to be right, you have to work your hardest, cannot be false ever, you cannot be lazy. And Mom was like, you have to be a good person.
Well, and you strike me as kind of, honestly, a legitimate success story in the sense that you didn't tumble into coke-addled oblivion. You actually were productive, and I think that reflects positively on kind of the overall upbringing that you got, that you were such an academically inclined human being, because your journey through academia is actually really impressive.
Thank you.
I mean, we could almost talk about between your Ivy League schooling, and your excelling at grades and your whole adventure in China. That could almost fill up a whole. Unfortunately, we wouldn't get to all the cool movies, but tell us a little bit about academia. What drove you to be such a strong academic person, and also just kind of the whole journey in terms of your East Asian studies, being in China, because you were on the eve of one of the most fractious times in Chinese history.
True.
You were right at the cusp of that, while you were absorbing and kind of immersing in the culture. Tell us a little about all of that.
Okay, well, I think just naturally, I just loved reading as a kid. Like, I would always, if I was sent to my room as a punishment, I would be happy, because then I would just read uninterrupted for an hour, and then they'd be like, you can come down now. Or I'd in class, I'd read under the table with the book. And I really wonder now, with phones and everything, whether a whole generation of people who would be doing that are not doing it because they're reading on the phone, but they're also being distracted by all the quick bites of things. And it's sort of sad, because there's something about books which are just irreplaceable, the experience of immersing yourself in them and seeing that world that your mind co-creates with the author, But yeah, I just was a natural student. I loved studying. I was kind of a geek. Romy and Michele is not that far from the mark, except that, they were a little dumber than I was with my best friends. But I was still a geek. I was still somebody.
You earned your nerd creds.
I did.
In a big way.
I went to 2 Star Trek cons when I was a teenager. So, the Federation insignia on Romy's dress was my idea.
That's beautiful.
But and then I got lucky to get into Harvard, and I went to Harvard, and I couldn't figure out what I wanted to study. And all the majors there were very narrow. Like, you had to already speak fluently the language of any culture, like you were studying in history and lit. Like, that was interdisciplinary. You could study literature and history, but you already had, so that was either Francophone countries, because I spoke French, or England, or whatever. And I was like, But if you did an art history class in that era, it wouldn't count. It was like the art wouldn't count, and it was like, why? And then I took this archaeology, art and politics in Bronze Age China with a famous Casey Zhang. He's a famous Chinese Bronze Age archaeologist. And I just found the course really fascinating. This was freshman year, and the section leader's like, we have a major that you might be interested in, and it was called East Asian Languages and Civilizations. You could study anything about Asia as long as it was about Asia. It could be, Shinto, architecture, Tang, poetry, Buddhism, the politics of the Vietnam War, anything, as long as it's about Asia, but you had to choose a central country. And I loved China and Chinese culture because I had a best friend who was Chinese American, and her family used to take me to Chinatown with them and to Peking Opera and stuff. So I kind of fell into this major, and it was very challenging because I had to learn Mandarin, and Mandarin is such a challenging language to learn because it's all memorization, and our ears and our mouths, just speaking English, are not accustomed to kind of the gymnastics that you have to do. But once I went to China and lived there for 8 months, all of a sudden it sounded like the speeding train on which people were riding when they were speaking to me, passing me very quickly, slowed down, and I could hop on and understand and answer them. But it's true, yes, I was there right before Tiananmen Square. Yeah. And I was actually writing a thesis about conflicts between Chinese and African students, which became apparent when they would have pro-democracy marches, but in the middle of it they would hold up placards saying things like, black devils go home, leave our women alone. And I was like, what the heck is happening here? And I researched the situation. There had never been a substantial African presence in China, and there were not many people of color in China, from the African continent. And I was like, why is there racism here? Why is this happening? And so I just wanted to study racism, maybe because of my mom, because as you said, she was an activist. She marched in Washington with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the 60s, as a young woman, and, was very, very equality-minded. And so I was like, I want to study prejudice and racism and genocide and how it starts, and this is a specific context that I wouldn't have expected it in.
Oh, God, no.
And let's research this. And then right as I was about to leave, there was an incident at this college where there was literally a skirmish, a battle between foreign students and Chinese students over two African students bringing two Chinese national students to a Christmas dance. And they became violent, and they were storming the building and, vandalizing and fighting. And so I got a Ford Foundation grant to go back, because I had gone back to America, to go back to interview people who were involved in it and then study the political changes because China used to need to enlist the help of third world countries to build up its, world preeminence. But once it got recognized in the United Nations, it felt like it didn't need the African countries as much. So their program,
they had the freedom to not be.
So they were still giving free educations, graduate educations to mostly male students from various African countries, but they stopped treating them well. The whole point was to encadreize other parts of the world to make them Maoist, but it wasn't really working. And then they started having, it was all about interracial dating. That was where all the sparks started to fly. It was kind of crazy to see. And one couple killed themselves because the Chinese parents wouldn't accept them. They wanted to get married. And so that was a fascinating venture to write this very long, 125-page paper and study this. But then I got out of college and I went back to acting. And so the way that I followed up on my academic background is when the UN asked me in 2009 to be a Goodwill Ambassador for them on human trafficking, a subject on which I had already become an activist. I said yes, and I devote a lot of time to researching human trafficking, which is the ultimate otherization of people, but it's not due to race, it's not due to gender, although gender plays a role in it, and the global south is more likely to be victimized. It's literally the profit motive. If a trafficker could make money off of you, he or she will. It's just treating people like things in order to make money and abusing them to the point of killing them or threatening them or their families with death. And I've interviewed almost 100 trafficking survivors around the globe, and I've tried to become as good an advocate for them as I possibly can. I've helped change laws, write laws, raise money. I was part of a $30 million addition to the California budget a couple of years ago. Now we're trying to do the same thing again for emergency funding for trafficking service providers. And I'm going down to Mexico City next week for the second annual, I'm on the board of the UN Voluntary Trust Fund for Victims of Trafficking Persons. So I took all that knowledge about ill treatment of people and otherization of people and writing, and I write my speeches and I try and be the best advocate I can. But it's interesting. I mean, there's an alternate universe in which I could have become a professor, and if Tiananmen Square had not happened,
I was going to say,
that
if you had not had Tiananmen Square in your way, you probably, I'm assuming you would have been content to be an academic and would have found plenty of fulfillment.
Although when I was in China, I have to say, I started singing jazz with 2 local bands, and my music was contraband because I had the fake books that my dad would send me in care packages along with DiCecco pasta and San Marzano tomatoes. And because I was so homesick, and he would send me all the things I could make Italian food with. And then
which includes contraband music.
Yeah, but then I asked him to send me the music, and then people wanted to hang with me because I had, all the classics. I had the music, and so we sang at Maxime's de Paris. There, they had a Maxime's.
Oh man!
And I sang one for my baby and one for the road, and I sang Autumn Leaves in French and Desafinado and Satin Doll, and it was really, really fun. And then there was this Chinese young woman, wannabe film director, and she was the third AD, she was a first AD, but the third of the first ADs in China on The Last Emperor.
Oh wow!
And so she wanted to do a movie about a reverse Beatles, a Chinese Beatles, and I would be the American girl that breaks them up, sort of, So I was going to act if I came back, I was going to be in her movie, but then Tiananmen Square happened, and then none of us could go back for a few years because it would be a risk to our Chinese friends. We wanted to show displeasure to what had happened to,
Makes sense, absolutely.
And that brought me back to New York and brought me back to acting. So.
Have you, just out of curiosity, have you been back in the interim to China?
I have. I went back with Mr. Armani right before our wedding, and that was 2004, and it had already changed enormously. It had become completely capitalist, but still, a dictatorship. So it was kind of it was interesting because when I was there, there was at least a kind of common thread through the way everyone lived and the political philosophy. It was like the iron rice ball, they used to call it. No one was rich, no one was poor, everybody was taken care of, but there was no chance for individual ambition or self-achievement or whatever. And now there are extremes between rich and poor there, and it looks like any other global city with the big brands and everything, but there's still this autocratic, control over the country.
But it would never happen here, fortunately. Where does acting come into the picture for you? Actually, I had read that, and please correct me if the fount of ever accurate movie data, IMDb, is correct or not on this, that you had been involved in The Guiding Light, I think, as a substitute for one of the characters.
I was, yeah, because when I was about 23, 24, I was given a screen test contract to play this role of Julie Camilletti on Guiding Light, and it would have been a 3-year contract, and I got cold feet, and I didn't want to do it because I was like, if I get this, then I'm tied in for 3 years, and I really think within 3 years' time I could do more for my career than doing a soap opera, because I wasn't a soap opera fan. And in those days, I think people were a little bit judgmental of soap operas. But then, so I ended up backing out of the screen test, and then they hired another girl, and then she got sick. And then I found out that on soaps, if the person is sick, they hire someone else, an understudy, to play their role. So I got to play the role that I didn't get about, I think, 3 different episodes. Yeah, it was interesting.
So it's like Darren from Bewitched, only, at hyper speed. One day, Dick York, the next exertion. I had also read somewhere that is it true that you had a small uncredited role in Larry Cohen's The Stuff?
Yeah, I'm one of the stuffies, one of the factory workers.
Yeah.
And if you look for me carefully, I have brown hair, I have a ponytail, sort of a short ponytail, and I'm wearing one of those jumpsuits, and I'm climbing up a tower.
Hey, there you go.
I've
seen that movie many
of it.
times.
Someone showed me a screenshot of it, and I wish I had taken it because I'd have to watch the whole thing and then take a picture, and I don't really have the inclination to do it. But yeah, it's me, but it's like 16-year-old me.
So the 90s obviously seemed to be when your career was definitely taking off, and you did with Stillman, you had done Barcelona, which was kind of getting a lot of buzz. Your character's wonderfully enigmatic and interesting in that movie. And what was it like working for Stillman? I'm assuming also that this was kind of a springboard for you getting noticed for the big Oscar-winning role. What was Stillman like, and what was the experience of working on Barcelona like?
It was a great experience. I was, there with the other cast members. We were all young, living in Barcelona. It was so beautiful there, so amazing. Whit is really, really a stickler for doing his lines exactly as written. There is no improv. There is no...
That doesn't surprise me.
He's like, you forgot a comma. I mean, but you can't argue with the results. It's really terrific filmmaking, and he has his own distinct, understated voice, and he's very funny. I had some great monologues in that.
Yes, absolutely.
The loud, badly dressed bad people in America eating their hamburgers, and all that. It was just a really brilliant monologue.
Yeah,
watching their 80 channels of television, the whole thing. And then I had already booked Quiz Show, and I was supposed to return for Quiz Show, but then our movie went over by a month. So in order to let me out to go do Quiz Show, I had to agree to come back, not get any more money, and I had to live in the apartment I was living in, this beautiful apartment, but the family that owned it was moving back in.
Oh, good Lord.
So I had to move but they ended up being really good friends of mine after that. So then I became sort of like an adopted daughter to them, but I had this beautiful big apartment to myself, and then this was Whit's bargain, okay, you can go do your Robert Redford movie, but you've got to come back, and now you're getting
You've
roommates.
got roommates, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, but it was awesome. It turned out great. But yes, it was that film that, so I had gone in to read for Mighty Aphrodite, not knowing what it was about, and they wouldn't give us any information about it. The only thing that they said was the character was unfettered. And then when you go in, they hand you the sides. You don't get them until, you go in the room. And it was the scene where she says, "Are you my 3 o'clock?" But there's no real detail in it. It doesn't go that far in it. And I was like, what is she, a massage therapist? Is she a call girl? What is she? And they finally begrudgingly admitted that she was an escort or a call girl, whatever. And so I did it, but they were like, very nice, thank you. And then they told my agents, well, it's not going to go any further. The character's too far from her own natural personality. And my agent was like, no, you don't understand. She's a chameleon. Have you seen her in this Whit Stillman movie? And so then Woody, a few weeks later, requested a print of Barcelona that he watched in his private screening room for all the girls in it. I think he was interested in looking at all of us. And then he was like, wait a second. That girl has nothing to do with the girl I met last year for Don't Drink the Water. Bring her in again. So then I was shooting The Buccaneers in London and all over England, and we were just finishing that up with Carla Gugino and a bunch of other people, and Alison Elliott and James Frain, and I just finished it and took a train down from the Cotswolds and went to London. And in my mind, I could remember the scene. So I was trying to re-memorize the scene just from my experience in the room, and I was working on it and created this whole look. I bought this crazy Gautier Jr. dress with bumblebee neon stripes and fishnet, and wore a ton of makeup and these crazy sandals with flowers coming out of my toes. And then I got to the audition, and they handed me a completely different scene. And I was like, no, and my heart kind of sank, and then I was like, no, Mira, don't let this defeat you. Don't let this defeat you. Just take a big swing at it, And so they gave me this little time to go into this little room in the hotel suite, and I sat there, and they said, take as much time as you need with it. And so I took 15 minutes, and I think that they were shocked that I took that long. Because they were like, are you all right? Do you need anything? Oh, no, I'm fine. Do you need me to come out? No, it's fine. I'm like, thank you. Because I wanted to memorize it well enough that I could look up from the page and at least know what the beats were, and at least, and I had this protein bar I'd bought in England. Hadn't tried it yet, but the scene was the scene where she's eating the spaghetti. and she's really gorging herself as she's talking about her first porn experience and how she loves acting and she wants to study. And so we went out, I started doing the scene, and I start chomping on this, like, disgusting, like, cardboard tasting, you know, thing, but I'm like, and, you know, talking with my mouth full, mouth open and everything, but probably would have broken my mother's heart. And, and at the end, he was like, okay, yes, that was, your instincts were all right, and I wasn't sure if he meant, like, just okay,
so, yeah.
or all correct. And you were funny. Just if we do this, I might want you to work on a bit of a voice because not only is she cheap, but she's stupid. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I left, and then downstairs I was like, wait, oh my gosh, I forgot to show him the pictures of me with a blonde wig because I had just done a Showtime movie called Parallel Lives, and I had this platinum blonde wig, and I played Ben Gazzara's girlfriend. I was always paired with these much older men, Alan Alda, Woody Allen, Ben Gazzara. Like there was like a 40-year age gap, and so I called up, and he's yes, and I was like, oh, sorry, it's Mira. I just wondered, what if she was blonde? I have pictures of myself. All right, you can leave them here. It depends on who's going to play my wife in it, you know, whether she is blonde or brunette. And I was like, okay, all right, thank you. And then later that week, I was offered Hackers, and so my agents had to tell them, you know, she's got a conflict for the same time period, and then they offered me the movie. And I didn't know at that point if it was just those two scenes that I auditioned with, or
wow,
more.
Yeah.
You know, and they wouldn't tell us whether it was like a lead or just a supporting role, but. You know, and that was the real beginning of my bigger career. I have to say I have parted ways with Woody. I do believe he molested his daughter, and I wrote a big apology letter to her on Huffington Post. It was published. You can find it online. Because I don't care that he was my hero since I was 12. Like, it's not okay. And I should have understood better in the 90s the whole court situation, but I didn't look into it enough, and I didn't see that the case had been stopped because of fear for damage to the child's mental health, and a judge ordered him not to be alone with her, and it wasn't that he was found guilty, they just stopped the trial, that he was found innocent. Like, people are like, he was found completely innocent. That's not true. And if you watch that terrible documentary, like Dylan versus Farrow, or whatever it's called, Woody Allen versus Farrow, it's incontrovertible. Like, he molested his child. So, and he married his daughter. So,
yeah.
So, you know, but anyway, I know I owed him a lot, but I just, you know, it doesn't matter. So,
you sound like you have a good perspective on it. And I would actually like to mine the positive from you doing this role, because I think you make Linda an absolutely wonderful three-dimensional character. And I think she's part of that grand tradition of blondes who everyone thinks are dimmer than they actually are. Mm-hmm. Like, right in line with Judy Holliday from Born Yesterday and Marilyn Monroe, who you played. I feel like she's very much in that tradition.
Oh, thank you.
She's so humanized. And I mean, and that's another thing. I mean, I rewatched the movie very recently, and a lot of it is cringe because
I know, it's weird.
You know.
It's like you watch it now. I watched it at the El Paso Film Festival last year, and I was like, oh, wow. It doesn't completely hold up. It's dated. I mean, some of it's very dated, right?
Yeah.
I think, like, you couldn't make it that way now.
Yeah.
Just like you couldn't make John Hughes movies now,
Oh,
but,
God, no. Yeah.
But, we all grew up with them and thought they were amazing,
Exactly.
But he actually, to his credit, did say in press, he said, the credit is all Mira's for the fact that Linda is lovable, because I set out to write the greatest vulgarian ever written, and she brought all this heart to it that I didn't see. And I was like, how could you not see it? You give her this beautiful story about her missing her adopted, her kid that she gave up for adoption, and she thinks about it all the time. Like, there's inherently built into the story such pathos for this woman,
absolutely,
who's also ridiculous, but her ridiculousness is kind of cute. She's absurd, but yeah.
Well, she's also a sweet person in the middle of it all.
She is, yeah.
She does not lose her sweetness, and that brightness of spirit, it doesn't get dimmed. And so those are the things that I think about, that I thought about, that were really recurring in my mind as I watched it.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful piece of work. I'm sorry about the context,
That's
but
okay.
I just really.
It did a lot of great things for my life. I just, it's been a little bit tarnished by that. Some people online are like, why didn't you give your Oscar back then? And I'm like, okay, well then half the people in
Why
Hollywood
doesn't
have
Patty
to
McDaniel's
give up.
Oscar get turned into, gold landfill, because she played a mammy, It's the same thing, You've done phenomenal work with what is now a less than societally acceptable piece of art,
Yeah, it's more about the artist, the fact that I
Thank you.
denounced him and whatever. But yeah, I mean it's an interesting time because there are so many people out there who have done bad things that we've discovered that obviously I'm part of the Me Too movement and was one of the people who denounced Harvey Weinstein, and he did punish me by suppressing my career for 20 years. I wasn't in a studio movie for 20 years once that started. 20 years. My complete prime as a leading lady was taken away, but I had my kids during that time. I became the UN Goodwill Ambassador in that time, and I never stopped acting. I just did sort of lower profile projects. And, as my grandmother used to say, not every evil comes to destroy us. And I do feel that, my life has been very rich, even if it's not the career that I expected it to be.
Well, and one thing I'm going to, full disclosure, I lost my father a little bit less than a year ago.
I'm sorry.
And thank you. But I wanted to bring that up because I was rewatching your acceptance speech for your dad, and the split screen where you're tearing up and he is sobbing like an operatic tragic hero at what you were saying and how you were so obviously and earnestly and wholeheartedly telling this audience of millions, a billion probably, that they were honoring him by honoring you, that you were like the viaduct you were the conduit of all of this honor that was so much his because of what he had taught you as an actor and just as a father.
Yeah.
And I wasn't cutting onions, I was tearing up.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. It was a beautiful moment, and thank you for being so open and sharing that.
Sure.
Let's move on further into the 90s, though, because one of the things I love about your career is after you did Mighty Aphrodite, you were like, pardon my language, what the fuck? I'll do a horror movie.
I know,
I'll do
that
a
was
broad
little crazy.
comedy. Was that part of the plans?
I think I could have been more judicious. I think I could have been more tactical, and it just wasn't the way I thought. And I was at the time dating Quentin Tarantino, who was so pro-genre.
Thank you.
So he was sort of shaking me up a little bit, and my agents were like, you're pissing away your Oscar year. You're following an Oscar with a lowbrow comedy, and then a horror movie and an action movie. And I was like, but it's Guillermo del Toro. He's a genius. Because and he had done Chronos.
Oh God, which is an incredible movie.
But most of America didn't know him. And then Antoine Fuqua is a huge action director now. But this was his first film. But it was a John Woo produced movie, and with Chow Yun-fat. But yes, I probably should have done a Merchant Ivory movie that year. But Romy and Michele was certainly the right choice. Certainly the right choice. It is by far my most popular.
Absolutely.
The thing that is most beloved in my filmography, and it hits a chord of truthfulness below the crazy sequins and silliness. So.
And one of the things I love Romy and Michelle's high school reunion as well. I think you're wonderful in it. I thought teenage Romy was adorable. I would have dated her in a heartbeat. I love one of the things that I think is most wonderful about that movie is it takes a lot of skill and a lot of work at maintaining a pocket universe to do a comedy that pitched that absurdly, And the movie, between the writing and the direction and yours and Lisa's, well, really everybody in the movie's performances, it creates this wonderful little pocket universe where it's like, even though it's all absurd, it all makes sense. And it's in this absurd little world, And I kind of wanted to pick your brain a little bit about creating the character, because Romy and Michele both are just wonderful, distinctive presences. You're not two peas in a pod.
Right,
Friendship-wise, you are, but you're very different people, personality-wise and appearance-wise, and outlook-wise and stuff. How much of that was you creating Romy, and how much of it was brought in by the writer-director?
First of all, it's a writer and a director. It's not the same person. So
I'm
Robin
sorry,
Kidd was the writer and David Merkin was the director. But
I think it was a lot me, yeah, because I think, other people had tackled the role before, because it came from a play called The Ladies' Room, and the Lisa was actually in the play, and there were two characters that are kind of like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern in the play, and I think the way the original person played Romy was very different from the way I did. It's just when I read it, that's how I kind of saw her. I saw her as very masculine, very kind of butch, and just thinking that she was the idea man of the two of them, when actually probably Michelle is the wiser one. But Michelle is willing to let Romy take the front seat, take the wheel, whatever. But she's super vulnerable, and I think that's one of the threads through most of my characters is their vulnerability. I kind of hate playing people who are super hard and villainous. I don't really love playing them, because if I can't relate to them, if I can't feel their heart, it's hard for me to play them. And with Romy, it was not hard for me, because also I, as I said, was kind of a nerd in high school and knew the pain of being called Mira Queera at 12, and or just having kids be sort of merciless to me, and feeling ashamed, and looking for comfort in my friendships, and having our own fun, and screw them, and we still got each other kind of thing. And so I think at the core of that movie is that real love of each other, and that real finding of what, it doesn't matter what they think, like we can just be ourselves. Absolutely. And like that's good enough. And
that's what's given the movie its legs, I think. That core of that,
It
absolutely.
really, people are like, oh my gosh, this got me through high school, this movie. Or it's my comfort movie, I go to sleep with it. Or I've danced this at my wedding. That is not uncommon. I literally
That's
just the other
awesome.
day, did a cameo for a woman who, she was sending her friend a Mother's Day cameo, and she was going to have her first baby, and any mothering advice from me. And also, by the way, she's the Romy to my Michelle, and we both danced the time after time danced at each other's weddings. And that is, maybe the 15th person who's told me that. So I've seen them online, people are us every year for Halloween. It's pretty crazy, how much of a sort of a cult following the movie has, and
Totally.
we are bringing you a sequel.
Thank you for jumping on that, because that was the next thing I was going to ask you.
I'm not really permitted to say that much about it. By my manager has been like, stop talking about it. But I'm an executive producer on it, as is Lisa.
Awesome.
The whole gang will be back for it. We're not shooting it till next year, sadly, but we are shooting it. So yeah.
I'm so interested in seeing what happens. Yes. Well, let's jump to kind of your first big genre effort, which is Mimic, working with, again, the genius Guillermo del Toro, one of the most entertaining creature features of the 90s. And, knowing your background, it is understandable how credible you make being a scientist. I mean, obviously, you were an academic who studied cultural things versus scientific things, but you really, you felt like that character. And it seems like, well, with a lot of the genre stuff, that it would have been kind of a blast to make. Was it? And what was Del Toro like to work with?
Well, he's amazing. He's very poetic. He's sort of darkly romantic. Like, he's gothic horror, and he's got these notebooks, and you've probably seen them if you've ever seen any of the exhibits about.
Yeah, the EMP Mopop exhibit, Can't Look Away, the lore of the horror film, they had one in there. I don't know if they still have it, but it's one of his sketchbooks, and the work is just breathtaking. Yeah, he's a genius.
Yeah.
That word gets tossed around like use Kleenex today, but he is legitimately a genius.
He is, and so that was wonderful working with him and kind of collaborating with him, and he allowed me to come up with some of the ideas in it. Like, at the end, I was like, she has to do something heroic, because they kept changing the ending and cutting the budget and cutting the schedule. And there were internal problems with that, which I'm sure you know, that they fired him briefly, and then I actually fought back with my agents and managers, and then he was rehired based on the strength of his cutting together the assembly of the footage that he had not been cutting together. The editor had been doing it solo in New York, and they had him recut it, and then they rehired him. But if I had not stood up for him, I don't think they would have done that. But
I think what we would have lost subsequently with the other work
he might never
he's
have done other movies.
Exactly, yeah.
Being fired from your first big budget movie, it's a kiss of death. So the idea of, as I said, they kept changing the ending, cutting it, slashing the budget, and I was like, I have to do something to save the boy. I I have to save somebody. And so I came up with the idea of doing the stigmata, like cutting my hand and holding it up for the creature to smell and chase after me on the tracks to save Chewie.
Oh, wow.
And because it went in with his sort of Gothic Catholic,
Oh,
symbolism
totally,
too.
yeah.
But it was my idea, so he let me do that. So that was cool. But it was very cold and freezing, and we shot so many night shoots, and we were like underground and in studios and lying in murky water on the ground, But I did get to study with this guy, Professor Thomas Eisner, who worked at Cornell University. I went to visit him.
Oh, wow.
And he was an insect
Entomologist.
Yes, like lover of insects. He just loved them so much. He was just so passionate about it, and that gave me a whole new perspective. I was like, okay, like I may not love insects at all, but
But I can play someone who does.
yes, but I could see the passion and the affection that he had for them, and the deep devotion as a lifelong study that he had. And he actually rewarded me for our friendship by naming a certain chemical emitted by a kind of beetle that is trying to attract a mate, and I think it's like Mira Sorvino or something.
I saw
like
that, yes.
Yeah.
That's getting, that's that. You've arrived as an actress when you're named after a insect pheromone. That's awesome. Wanted to touch on working on the replacement killers. Good Lord, Chow Yun Fat. And another. You brought up a great point about playing strong female characters where it's not all cap strong female character, because Meg the Tattoo Artist I feel like she's a wonderful, there's a kind of film noir Dane quality to her.
Oh, cool.
And she kicks ass. So, and again, this is another question I will ask about a lot of roles that people play. How much of that was you? How much of that was Antoine? It feels like there was a lot coming from you on that.
I mean, most things, honestly, most directors hire actors to do that creative work. They hire the right person for the job, and they trust that person to bring the goods. And once in a while you will have a director who wants to be a dictator and control every aspect of the performance and tell you how to say the lines and give you line readings. But good directors generally trust you, and then you do the work, and you come up with it. You come up with the birthday cake fully made of the character, and you present it on the first day of the set. On that one, in the rehearsals, I had come back from shooting reshoots on Mimic where we had done the scene with the hand, and I was screaming, right? And it blew out my vocal cords.
Oh.
And so I came back with this very Demi Moore, like dark, throaty, gravelly voice. And he's like, I like that thing with your voice. I like that. Can you keep doing it like that?
Oh,
God.
Were you like screaming in the bathroom
So
every night?
Every day I had to go holler for like 3 minutes. and Chow Yun Fat actually like mocked it in the Chinese press. He was like, oh, American method actor. She would go and yell in the corner. And I was like, it wasn't to get into character. It was to blow out my vocal cords. It was to ruin my voice so I sounded like Meg. But I got to study with like this guy, Mick, who was former British secret intelligence black ops who trained De Niro for Ronin, and I got to kick and jump and shoot and roll and everything. But there were more blanks fired in that movie than any other project I've ever done. It was crazy.
I don't doubt it.
Yeah.
I've seen the movie. I don't doubt it. What was Chow Yun Fat like, aside from making fun of you?
I know he was very cool. But he had kind of his little entourage, so I didn't get to know him that well, honestly. I mean, obviously he's an amazingly talented actor.
Yeah.
Very Cary Grant of the John Woo set.
Oh,
but,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I had to ask you about Spike Lee. I'm a fan of the ambitious, flawed, sprawling, but I think quite wonderful Summer of Sam.
Yeah, it's
One of the
great
just
movie.
great period evocation. What was your experience like on that?
So I was actually attached to Summer of Sam before Spike came onto it. It was
Oh,
written by my friend Michael Imperioli, whom I had done a movie called Sweet Nothing with Gary Winnick about a crack addict and his wife, and it's a beautiful movie, really, really powerful movie that no one had seen, but really, really good. And Michael wrote this, and he asked me to be the other girl. So I was going to be the other female character in it, who's goes out with the punk rocker, and then Spike came, and there was a moment, and then Spike came on board. There was a moment where it was going to be Benicio del Toro and Leonardo DiCaprio as the boys, and then and then it was, you know, how it ended up, which Adrian Brody and John Leguizamo, they're both amazing.
They're great in it. Yeah.
And then Spike wanted me to play Deanna, not the other one, and I was like, okay, great. And it was very improvisational, and he would, during rehearsals, he would have me and John improv, and then he would write down what we said, like in the breakup scene and stuff, and he would add it into the script. He shot everything with 2 cameras at once, so you caught these lightning in a bottle moments where, like in the cemetery scene, where he spits in my face and then I slap him, like Spike was like, spit in her face. And so, but I didn't know that was coming, right? But I really trusted John and he trusted me. So this can only happen when you've got this intense trust between people. So then he did that and I whacked him across the face. And Ellen Kuris's cameras were on both sides of the car catching it, so we have that moment in real time and we don't have to try and recreate it in another take. And those kind of things are invaluable. Like you can't really duplicate a moment in time. And those scenes were such moments in time, you know? And so we didn't do the usual turn the whole room around and then shoot from the other side for the coverage. It was always 2 at once. And that scene is very explosive. The one day I did not like on that set was the Plato's Retreat scene. That was crazy. Everyone in the room except for John and me were fully naked for like 8 hours.
Oh, good Lord.
And they were all hooting and hollering and pretending to have sex. And I was wearing like a triangle and pasties, and I was like, what am I doing? And John was wearing a sock, and we're just there, you know, having this simulated orgy. And at the end of it, I just started crying. I cried for like 20 minutes, and I was like, this is not what I became an actress for, to do like, you know, fake porn. But I mean, you know, it is what it is.
It's
and
all
the
for the
movie
art.
is great. The movie is great, I think.
Unfortunately, it looks like we're very close to the time limit here. I could talk to you for another hour.
Have you seen Shining Veil? Because I think that's something
No,
you guys...
I have not.
Okay, good. Some of you
I
guys
did
see
want to. I did want to
Is-
turn it over to the audience. I don't know if maybe we
yeah,
can squeeze
yeah,
in
let's ask some
one
questions.
question.
Sure.
Yeah, yes, sir.
2 quick ones. What was it like dating Quentin? Whirlwind romance for a little bit now. And you were in a movie called At First Sight with Val
Val
Kilmer.
Kilmer, yeah.
I know he just passed, but like, can you be honest and let us know how it was working with him? I heard he can be kind of difficult sometimes.
No, that was just his reputation. Honestly, I hate that word because that is like, it's kind of like glitter, and once it gets on people, you can't get it off. And he wasn't difficult on our movie, and he was very sweet. He's a little unusual, like he's not like every person, and he was very intellectual and curious and like a deep thinker about things, but super talented. So I loved working with him. Dating Quentin, I dated him for like 3 or 4 years, so it was like a big part of my life. He introduced me to all of his love of genre and horror and action and like the pulp movies, and I really enjoyed it. And you know, ultimately the relationship ran its course, and we parted as friends, and we're still friendly, you know. But I mean, we had a wonderful time while we were together.
Let's get one more in real quick.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, big fan.
Thank you.
So, your career, it seems like you've really paved your own way with what you wanted to do in acting, and especially like through the 90s. How do you feel about like Demi Moore recently and her big win with like The Substance and things like that, and what she's had to go through for, you know, going, you know, she was an actress at the same time as you, and I know you're still an actress, but how do you feel about her big win? And
I think it's great. I think it's great that I think women of a certain age, that age is being thrown out the window, and
Thank you. Yeah.
you know, she did an extraordinary job on that film. She was very brave. I could not have done that. I don't like doing nudity. I would not have been able to do that role. But she was amazing. I think the only complaint I have about that movie is that it's positing her as somebody who's like past it, and yet she looks perfect.
Oh God, I know.
She's like perfect. Like what
60-year-old woman do you know that can lie on the ground naked and look that perfect? And like with those extreme close-ups, I mean, she looks amazing. She's a stunningly beautiful woman. So I, you know, it was a little bit of like, what? They're making it like she's like looks terrible and is past and is aging, but you know, but not. I mean, she's stunning, right? But then they turn her into that creature, monster, whatever, which is really just the last scene is just so crazy, right? But she's amazing, and I'm really happy to see that. I mean, look, there's a lot of my colleagues, you know, who are my age or a little older or a little younger, who are, you know, tackling really important roles, and I think they're writing more of them now.
Yeah.
And I just hope that that continues, because every person is the main character of their life. Like, just because people get older doesn't mean they stop being the one person at the center of their life, and they always have a story. They always have a story. They always have humanity. They always have loss and love and courage and challenges. And so I think the more we create stories that honor every phase of life and don't put an expiration date on women, especially versus on men, you know, I think we're moving forward, and I'm very happy for her. It's a wonderful thing that happened for her.
And that's a wonderful note to close on.
Yes, but watch Shining Vale, because my career's not over.
Oh, absolutely.
And Shining Vale is current, and it's horror, and it's comedy, and it's quite funny, and I play 3 different characters in season 2. So it was so much fun to do, and I got to dance and sing, which I love to do. So yeah.
Well, I thank you so much for being here, Mira.
Thank
Another
you.
hand, Mira Sorvino. You'll be here all weekend, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. She'll be here all weekend. She'll visit her table.
Yeah,
And,
we're going to take a little lunch break right now, so in half an hour I'll be back at my table. So I look forward to seeing you all there. If you'd like to come and chat. Thank you.
Awesome.